Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about chapter 26 in the book, which is Tradition and Change in East Asia. So to start, I'll talk about the Ming Dynasty in China, which lasted from 1368 to 1644. And it began with Emperor Hongwu, and he founded the Ming Dynasty by driving out the Mongols that were in charge of China at the time, and then he created a centralized government. And to help spread the centralized government, he entrusted mandarins who were traveling imperial officials, and then eunuchs who were castrated men with many of the governmental duties. And he entrusted the eunuchs because since they could not create families, he did not have to worry about any family groups coming up and rising against the emperor at any time. And then Yongle, who was emperor between 1403 and 1424, was another notable Ming emperor, and he actually sponsored some naval expeditions throughout the Indian Ocean, and this was in an attempt to increase Chinese influence throughout the area and also promote more trade. And however, naval expeditions were kind of halted after his reign because future Ming emperors thought that the naval expeditions were too expensive. He also moved the capital from Nanjing up to Beijing in 1421, and he put it there because it was closer to Mongol territory, and this kind of helped him keep an eye on the Mongols, but it also made it easier for the Mongols to reach Beijing if they were to invade. And this was proven in the 1440s when the Mongols attacked China, and they actually decimated a few Chinese armies. And then the emperor was actually captured in 1449. And then after that, future Ming emperors decided that they needed to build the Great Wall of China to prevent any further invasions. And they built it, and it was 2,500 kilometers long, 10 to 15 meters high, and it had watchtowers and signal towers along the way to improve on communication when invasions were actually going on. And so in the actual dynasty, they tried to remove any and all Mongol influence, and they tried to revive the old Chinese traditions, including Confucianism and the civil service examinations. And but Ming started to decline starting in the 1520s and 1560s, and that was partially because it was due to the pirates ravaging the eastern coast, and due to the navy and the coastal defenses proving ineffective. It actually took 40 years to stop the pirate attacks, and it was also in part due to the fact that the government became inept. And this is because the emperors stayed secluded in Forbidden City and became detached from their rule. And an extreme example of this was Emperor Wan Li, who reigned between 1572 and 1620. And he's an extreme example because instead of interacting face to face with anybody, he actually only used eunuch intermediaries to conduct any government business. And this led to a lot of corruption with a lot of eunuchs gaining a lot of power. And then it also spread some discontent between a lot of the nobles, which then eventually brought about the collapse of the Ming Dynasty. And what kind of sparked the collapse was a famine, which happened during the early 1600s. And the peasants, who were the main victims of this famine, grew discontent with the government, and so they started leading revolts in the 1630s. And this aligned well with the Manchu invasion from the north. And the Manchus rallied support not only from the peasants, but also from the nobles and the discontent generals. And they eventually took Beijing in 1644 and replaced the Ming Dynasty with the Qing Dynasty, which lasted until 1911. And to understand the rise of the Qing Dynasty, you have to first understand the rise of Manchuria. And this began with Nurhaci, who reigned between 1616 and 1626. And he helped unite the rest of he was a tribal leader in Manchuria, and he helped unite the rest of the Manchu tribes to create a powerful Manchuria and a powerful Manchu army. And this powerful army actually removed Ming influence in Manchuria, and then conquered Korea and Mongolia, and then eventually took control of Beijing in 1644. Then the Qing dynasty was established because the Manchus were very well respected by the Chinese nobles and the generals, partially because they knew the Chinese language and Confucian teachings, and the nobles and generals were discontent with the emperor, and so they were actually more respected than the emperor. And so the nobles and the generals actually helped the Manchu invasion of China and the establishment of the Qing dynasty. And then a few notable emperors in the Qing dynasty were Kangxi and his grandson Qianlong. And Kangxi was actually a Confucian scholar, and he used Confucian teachings to influence his rule. And a few examples of this were he implemented flood control and irrigation. And flood control aligned with the Confucian teaching that rulers were meant to conserve the well-being of their people, and irrigation aligned with the promotion of agriculture that Confucianism was so well aligned with. And then Kangxi was also a conqueror, and so he, in an attempt to expand the Chinese influence, he actually took over Taiwan, which is where a lot of the Ming sympathizers went, and then he took over Mongolia and Central Asia. His grandson Qianlong actually also helped with conquering more of Central Asia and Southern Asia. And after that, he reigned through a great time of prosperity, where they actually had to cancel their tax collections on several occasions because the treasury grew to be too full. And then, however, because of this prosperity, he became a lot less involved near the end of his reign in government duties, and so he pretty much just left it to eunuchs. And then, while he was off with his harem, and that created a tradition for Qing emperors where they would just stay with their harem and then leave eunuchs, and then just like the Ming, it would eventually lead to problems in the Qing dynasty later on down the road. And in the Qing dynasty, they had a belief that the emperor was actually called the son of heaven, where he was seen as less than a god but more than a mortal. And then they also created a new upper class rank called the scholar bureaucrats, and these were government officials appointed by the emperor who were only men who passed the civil service exams. And these civil service exams were a lot of very hard tests that were centered around Confucian teachings, and they offered a lot of financial and social advancements because anybody from any man from any social standing could take them. And so they could go from the bottom tier up to a government official. And however, this helped, it created a more distinct social hierarchy. It also helped spread Confucian ideals throughout China. And also had a lot of cultural change throughout this time. And this is both in the Ming and Qing. They brought about filial piety and patriarchal society. And this is due to Confucianism, where patriarchal societies are where the men are the heads of the household or the countries. And then filial piety is where not only are the families subordinate to the fathers, then the families are subordinate to the emperor. And so it's like the emperor is the father to the country, and then the men are the fathers of their families. And men were very much favored in society. And this is due to the fact that men were able to take the civil service exams and So women were pretty much just there to have children, and then women were even subjected to finding in an attempt to marry into higher class, and that is where they contort their feet to make them smaller, and then some of the nobles actually thought that was attractive, and so then lower class would contort their feet to appeal to the upper class. And this time also brought about a lot of population growth and economic growth because of the increase in global trade, and the introduction of the American crops helped grow the population because it increased the food supply. So where the traditional Chinese crops could not grow, the American crops could grow. And so then they were able to utilize more of the land and increase the food supply that way. And then economic growth appeared because they were able to export their silk, porcelain, and tea, and then import more silver, which was the backbone of their economy. But foreign trade was very limited throughout China. And they actually only had a few ports that even allowed foreign trade. And then as far as technological advances go during this time, there weren't many, and this is partially due to the surplus of labor force and then also due to governmental influence. And the surplus of a labor force, reason why that did not bring many technological advancements is because instead of employers taking the time and effort to create a technological advancement to replace somebody's job, they would just hire more people for that job because there were so many people to replace. And then the governmental influence, the government feared that technology would lead to political and social instability, so they actually denounced technological advancement. And then they also created they established a more distinct social class network. And so they had the upper class, which consisted of scholar bureaucrats and the scholar gentry. And the scholar bureaucrats held the government positions and were the people who passed the civil service exams. And the scholar gentry were the noble landowners. And then in the middle working class, they had three rungs, where the highest rung was made up of peasants, and then the workers and the artisans, and then the merchants. And the peasants were so high up in the working class, where even though they might not have made as high wages, because Confucianism held agriculture to such a high extent, peasants were also held to a high extent. And then the merchants, even though they were really low on the totem pole, they usually had enjoyed great prosperity. And then the lower class included military and mean people, where mean people were slaves, entertainers, and prostitutes mainly. And then the reason why the military people were so low is because the Confucian ideals disagreed with militaristic society, and Confucianism kind of viewed the military as a necessary evil. And then actually talking about Confucianism, Confucianism are the values that were taught by Confucius on how to run a family and a government, and they included but were not limited to patriarchy, social hierarchy, agricultural promotion, and the welfare of subjects. And then also Zhu Xi, who was a Chinese philosopher, brought about Neo-Confucianism, where he combined Buddhist philosophy with Confucian ideals and morality. And so this emphasized self-discipline, filial piety, and obedience to rulers. And these ideals especially really aligned with Ming and Qing rulers. And so Confucianism and Neo-Confucianism were the main ideals promoted by the Ming and Qing dynasties. So even though Confucianism was the main source of ideology, the main ideology, Christianity kind of wanted their say in China too. And so Matteo Ricci kind of headed the Christian missionaries in China, and he was an Italian Jesuit, and he actually adopted some Chinese culture in an attempt to convert more Chinese to Christianity. So he would dress like them, and he also learned the language. And then Jesuits used Ricci kind of to open the doors to China, and so then more Jesuits would go in after Ricci because they liked him a lot. And then Jesuits introduced the Chinese to European science and technology. So they brought in European cannons for the military, and then they also corrected their calendars because their calendars were a little off, where they would mispredict solar eclipses, and so they helped fix that. And then they also brought in updated maps where they diplomatically placed China at the center. And then they also brought in ringing clocks because the nobles and emperors really liked the ringing clocks. And then the Jesuits tried to, in an attempt to convert more Chinese people to Christianity, they tried to portray Christianity as very similar to Confucianism, and then they also were very tolerant of Chinese culture. And so even though they were Christian, they could still follow a few of the traditions, Chinese traditions, like ancestral reverence. And so even though they were very tolerant, not many Chinese were converted. And this is mainly because Christianity was taught as the only true religion. And so Chinese would have had to completely disregard the Taoism and Buddhism they were taught since pretty much forever. And so not many were converted. And then the Pope eventually ordered a lower tolerance of Chinese culture for Chinese Christians. And so the Chinese emperor actually banned the missionaries. And then after the missionaries were banned, Christianity eventually became almost non-existent in China. And then in terms of the unification of Japan, the Tokugawa shoguns actually remained the rulers of Japan from 1600 until 1867. And they unified the shoguns, which were the military leaders, unified Japan by controlling the local lords, and they actually remained fairly secluded from global affairs, similar to China, except to a more extreme extent. And my partner will actually go more into depth on this section. So thank you for your time.